Samarth Swarup is a research associate professor at University of Virginia. His research interests include resilience and sustainability, computational social science, and simulation analytics. Samarth, thank you so much for taking the time today.
That's great. Thanks so much for inviting me, Joe. I'm really happy to be here.
So to start, I'd love to hear about the work you're doing at the Biocomplexity Institute. Could you tell us about what the Biocomplexity Institute is and what it does, and also what is biocomplexity?
Sure. Yeah. So the Biocomplexity Institute is a research institute at the University of Virginia, and we are really 100% focused on research. Um, so as to what biocomplexity is and what we do, it's really the study of complex systems from genes to society. And the bio part shows that there is an emphasis on biology, but it's broadly construed. So that includes things like public health. It includes things like agriculture. And the important thing about, what makes it complex, I mean, the physical world is complex enough. But what makes this complex in my mind is that when you look at biological systems, there is agency at every level. So if you look at individual cells, they are communicating with other cells and they are responding to the environment. So and the way that they respond depends in complex ways on their history and internal state. So they're doing stuff, right? They're agents. Um, and this view of agency extends all the way from cells to society. So it doesn't even end with individual humans because we behave collectively in organizations, and organizations have agency, nation states have agency. So this agentic view is really what gives complexity to these systems. So that's where the bio and the complexity comes in.
Awesome. Well, can you talk about what you're modeling? Specifically, I know you've done urban and environmental modeling. Can you talk about what are you modeling when you're doing urban and environmental modeling?
Yeah, definitely. So we do modeling in a lot of different domains. And I'll give you some examples and I'll tell you what is the thing that ties it all together. Okay? So we have done a lot of work in epidemiology, computational epidemiology. And this goes back, 20 years. So it was not just COVID, though we did a huge amount of work during COVID, but also looking at earlier epidemics, several of them like bird flu, like Ebola, like swine flu, like other flu epidemics and other things. And in each of these cases, the effort is to use very detailed computational models to try to figure out what's happening and how to best respond. And the same questions apply in other domains. So for example, if there's a hurricane and we're trying to model evacuation, right? And what is the effect of, let's say, flooding exposure? Or we're trying to look at population mobility during times of extreme heat, and we're looking at the effect of extreme heat exposure. Or we're looking at something like the spread of technology, like solar panels in the population, right? And what matters in all of these cases is the details, right? If you make very generic models, let's say, of what to do if there's a hurricane, the answers you'll come up with are only the obvious ones. You'll figure out something like, oh, you should evacuate before the hurricane. That's, no use to anybody, right? So what happens when a hurricane hits Houston, for example, right? It depends on the layout of the city. It depends on where the people are, where the roads are, where they can evacuate to, which areas are more at risk, which are, the coastal areas. And you have to build a model that can represent all of these details in order to be able to answer meaningful, concrete questions in actionable ways, right? And that is the technology that ties all of these applications together, whether it's disaster response or whether it's agriculture or whether it's epidemics or whether it's something else, right? These are all complex social systems. And so to make models of these, you need a lot of data to represent the ground reality. And these data come from many different sources. And they're not collected with the intention of integrating them. So we have to come up with methodology to integrate them. And these integrated models are what are now called population digital twins. In a decade or so ago, they were called synthetic populations. But now as people are, adding infrastructure layers to these and environmental layers to these, they're called population digital twins. So we've been building these for a long time, and a lot of our work is in how to do this right, so that once you have this, you can apply it to questions of urban resilience, questions of environmental modeling, and so forth. That's our core technology.
Yeah. Well, I want to continue down that thread of technology a little more. How do you utilize AI and machine learning in this work?
Yeah, in many ways. So, machine learning and AI itself has been evolving very rapidly. And so the ways in which it can be applied has been evolving very rapidly. So when we build these population digital twins, we need, for example, machine learning methods to infer some things. I'll give you an example. If you're looking at agriculture, we've been working on mapping agricultural infrastructure, right? So that is things like what types of irrigation are being used in which field, or where the irrigation canals are, right? And there's some data about these. They're limited. There's a lot of satellite imagery, often at very high resolution, that's available through work being done by NASA and NOAA. And they go down to like a square meter or 3 by 3 square meters and so forth. So very high resolution imagery. So the question is, can we develop the machine learning models that can take this high resolution imagery and identify these kinds of agricultural infrastructure? And it turns out to be pretty complicated because, for example, if you want to map irrigation canals, you have to be able to distinguish them from natural streams, and you have to be able to distinguish them from, let's say, roads, right? Because in an image, they might look kind of similar. And there are data available where people have actually mapped these out, and it turns out they're done by hand. So somebody actually is looking, somebody who knows, right, is looking at these images and actually drawing on top of it by saying, this is where the canal is. And like any human process, that is error prone. So you get these weird problems where, for whatever reason, there are gaps in the canal. Now, when you train a machine learning model, this is a huge problem because it says canal, 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 but wait, not canal here, and then canal, canal, right? And so it doesn't work very well. So we have been developing methods to bring in symbolic computing, like constraint optimization, because if it's a canal, there must be water in it, and that water has to come from somewhere. That means that every part of the canal has to be connected to a water source. So when you try to infer where the canal is and you see there's a gap, you can try to fill it in, right? And through this process of satisfying these constraints, it turns out that you can train the machine learning model to do better. So this is something we did very recently. So we use machine learning models as ways of building pieces of these digital twins. And in the process of that, we have to build better machine learning models. We're also doing things like using large language models, which are very popular, or other kinds of generative models, because not only are these large language models good for generating sort of linguistic interaction, they're good repositories of knowledge if you can figure out how to get it out, because they've been trained on, let's say, all the data in the web, right? So can we extract knowledge from this that is structured, let's say in the form of graphs, and reliable, so that it's not, something invented by the large language model, but really represents knowledge that's true. And how do you verify that, right? So we're developing methodologies for this. That's just sort of two examples. The other example that I think is really important is we do a lot of agent-based modeling. So this gets back to this theme of agency that I was talking about. So an agent-based model is a model that takes a population digital twin and says, oh, we have all these people represented here, and organizations, and maybe even things like traffic lights, right, that operate somehow, right? How do you put this model into motion? Meaning, how do you compute with this model about what happens as time starts to flow? And as we start to make interventions in these models, saying it's an epidemic model, what if this group of people were vaccinated? Or what if we tried to encourage people to wear masks and there was a certain level of compliance, right? So those kinds of questions put these population digital twins into motion, and we call these agent-based models. And how do you model the behavior of each agent? You can have things like rules, or you can have information based on surveys about what various kinds of people do in various circumstances, or you can use these large language models as simulacra of human behavior. So there are many ways to do it, but that's another way in which AI comes into these. And when you build these really large agent-based models, then they produce a lot of data, and understanding what just happened and how do we make sense of all this data, that's what we call simulation analytics.
Hmm. So, what insights and trends are you seeing illuminated in this work?
Uh, a number of things. So one is there is great interest these days in producing data that are AI ready. And that's not an easy thing. So and there are levels of readiness, Can data directly be used by some AI algorithm? It turns out not, like the irrigation canal example I gave you. But also, can simulated data be used for training machine learning models? And that's a different question in itself, right? So there are various ways in which these agent-based models can be used. And more broadly, we call them synthetic information environments, where you can have hybrid human and AI systems. So you can have some kind of an analyst or a policymaker interface with this kind of environment and ask questions or guide the model and say, this is, the question I want to analyze, or I want to know why this happened in this model and not this other thing. Can you explain that, right? So building these environments in a way that they augment human intelligence, that they augment human work, is, I think, a very important direction to go. And this is the way to make sense of complex systems. And it's a process where somebody uses this and actually applies it and helps refine it. And this is how you build trust in these models, right? Because a very big question right now is about the ethics of AI, right? How do we use these in a way that helps human society as opposed to harming it? And I think this is an important way to think about that.
Yeah. So, what does the future of this research look like?
That's a great question. So, I love science fiction. I read a lot of science fiction. I watch science fiction TV shows and movies. And It's just a fascinating source of ideas. So you've probably heard of psychohistory from like the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov. There's a show about it also, right? And that idea, he developed this in the 40s, was can we have a science of human cultural evolution, right? Um, and He didn't know about AI. He didn't know about agent-based models. So in his stories, it's a bunch of equations. But now I think we can do better, right? Because we can actually represent human society in a great amount of detail. There's a lot of data being gathered all around us. And we can make these models so that they're, private or privacy preserving from the ground up. So it won't be Joe in the model, but it'll be somebody with maybe similar demographic characteristics, similar activity patterns, but it can't be used to say map your activities because that's very important. The privacy is very important, right? So the idea is, can we go from where we are with these modeling capabilities, expand them to include things like the environment, and develop a science from it that is a science of how human society can be and is resilient, how it can change and evolve in better ways, and how we can shape that. So that's one thing. Another example is um, how do we think about understanding these kinds of complex systems. So I'll give you another example. There's a novelist named Dan Simmons. He's written a bunch of very famous books like Hyperion. Another one he wrote was a duology, Ilium and Olympus, and it's based, at least in part, on the Trojan War, right? But it's a science fictional setting. So there are these people who can wear these devices that allow them to see the information flow in everything, like literally, like, oh, light is coming and being absorbed by the leaves, and that's, information flow about how energy is being transformed, all of that. It's very overwhelming. But the key thing is that understanding information flow in complex systems is the route to understanding causality. It's the route to understanding how structure emerges in these complex systems, how it evolves and changes. So from an analytical perspective, that is a very important insight, which is that we need to focus on the information flow in these models. So that I think is also a very interesting thing. And last, I'll say that because I want to bring this back to the question of agency, because I think theoretically that is sort of the most important underlying thing. And it's about human agency. So when we say agency, we mean the ability to have control over our own fate, make decisions for ourselves, and to be able to have goals and plans and be able to achieve them, right? Um, and these are always affected by society. Society imposes constraints on us, and that is natural and good. Um, so there's always this sort of interplay between individual agency and social structure. This is a very old thing in sociology, right? But it is changing now with the introduction of AI because you can have adversaries that you can use AI systems and suddenly inject information at a large scale into social systems, right? But in an adversarial way, maybe to influence people's opinions, right? So we really need to understand what agency is and how it is changing in today's world. And to me, this is the most urgent topic. This is why I began with talking about agency, and this is where I want to bring it to, because in terms of where the research is going, there are all these technological changes happening, but we need to develop this sort of theoretical underlying understanding of how it is affecting human society, and agency is the way to think about it.
Hmm. Well, Samarth, thank you so much for sharing your research and your insights and your wisdom. And I hope we can continue the conversation down the road.
Thank you so much. This was fun.